Okay, so welcome to our third session in the class. Um, Today we're going to be looking at chapter two of everybody seeing this. Just let me know, please. Yes, no, maybe.
No, so I'm not seeing anything on the screen. Only you.
Right. I might have to share my screen, right? That will be useful, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah, the share
Yes,
so
sir.
we
Yes,
can
That
sir.
would that would help.
Yes,
now
sir.
see.
Yeah. And again, older and a little dotish with it too, so that's what happens. All right, everybody seeing this, cool? All right, so today's
Correct.
chapter actually is going to take us into the journey of, and just for focus issues, let me just turn my mic off, my camera off, so y'all could focus on this. So today we're going to be looking at sort of the evolution of leadership thought and ideas over the time frame that we're going to be looking at, starting by observing what general feelings the text tells us about the perception of what leadership is. So one of the first things that comes to mind when somebody arrives in a position of leadership is that this is something that you worked hard towards getting. So often it is perceived as a prized or coveted phenomenon in an organization or in the society. So you worked hard to become the leader of your party. You worked hard to become the leader of the organization, that type of stuff. Those are the kind of concepts that we can have coming up. Now, as you arrive in a position of leadership, the way in which people treat you is obviously going to be different. Some people admire people in positions of leadership and aspire to become people like that. Other people just don't like people in leadership positions because they become what we call the man. You all ever heard that phrase before? The man? And your life's ambition is to rebel against the man. You all know about that, right?
Yeah, I've heard it before.
Yeah, you heard it before. What does that mean though?
Like rebelling against authority, like
Correct.
people have this term stick it to the man kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it. That's correct. Very, very good. Yes, and that's how some people, or the various types of responses you can get. Now, McGregor Burns observed in 1978 that leadership is probably one of the most observed but least understood phenomenons in the world, and that's something that we're going to see play off here. Welcome, Malik. Um, in terms of where we're going to be going. So it's been observed and studied so much. We have all of these different programs that exist to try and explain. Now, this is just a few that I found with some really neat texts that go along with it. How many of these are you all familiar with? You should be at least familiar with the leadership experience. That's a text that we're using in our version of the leadership experience. I have done this program here, the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People with Stephen Covey. I've looked at a number of the Tim Robbins videos that he did as well, and I did another program called the Leadership Challenge that was led by a professor out of West Virginia University. So there are a number of different programs that exist. There are thousands of them, and generally they are shaped towards a particular um, set of employment or types of jobs. So you have leadership for the business executives, you have leadership in education, you have leadership in hospital management, you have all different types of leadership programs that exist. Um, Simply because we want to be better leaders in whatever sphere we are operating in. We aspire to be effective leaders, and we want the experience to be something that is enjoyable to everybody. Okay, so as a result, what we have to start to understand now is from the situation that we're looking at, this is something that has been studied and sort of like broken down by a lot of people. The problem that comes up is that there is no one clear definition of what leadership is because it means different things to different people. And when you move around the world, if we start to look at things from a global perspective, different cultures view leadership differently. So, for example, if you go into Eastern cultures, age is one of the biggest determinants of leadership and respect. Um, though Western culture is a lot different, age is no longer considered as a one of the primary things for leadership, but more along the lines of expertise and know-how. Those are the things that become more critical there, and of course that is beginning to infiltrate based upon the nature of globalization. It's starting to infiltrate other cultures around the world, and that leads us into cultural clashes and so on. The question I want you to take away from here, and it's part of your reflections that you should add, is, what are your current perceptions of leadership? How do you see it? Write about it, and include it in your self-analysis, so that you kind of get an idea of where you start from at this point moving forward. Now, generally, however, in the be all and end all of things, whenever we have our leaders in place, what we really want from our leaders as followers is that the problems that we all face, um, we would like them to find solutions for it. And I've listed a number of key areas here of global concern: climate change, globalization, poverty, access to healthcare, education, and other critical services. Um, what are the concerns you would like to bring to bear as in terms of what's important for us here in Trinidad? What would you add to this list? Anybody? Ms. Dumas, can you speak? I know Malik's at work. No? Right. So whoever can speak can add their 2 cents. What about Nikisha? What would you add that we expect to this list here of things that leaders we are looking to our leadership for responses and answers about? Anybody? Wow, nobody.
Like, like if I had to say something,
Yep.
I feel like in Trinidad we have no real accountability.
Uh-huh.
I don't know
Okay.
how that would fit into what you have there, but I
Well,
would
it's
wish I
go
would
ahead.
wish for there to be a system in place for
Mm-hmm.
accountability. So, for instance, in like the government sectors and so on, people treat those who come in for services very,
Shoddily.
yeah, the service is bad. And it's because there's this culture where they know they're secure because they're under a contract, or they have a government job and they know they're not going to easily lose their jobs and so on. And even with not just government sectors, but like WASA and all these other places, people feel as though they could do what they want. So they do what they want, and it
Mm-hmm.
breeds a lot of corruption and so on. So I would wish that there's some kind of accountability system where people that will kind of hinder them from behaving in these ways and acting in these ways. I don't know how it will fit here, but that's what I think.
All right, that makes sense because what you're referring to there is what we've been striving for in this country is called public sector reform, and that has to do with improving our customer service care and understanding that when you are dealing with the public, you're there to serve the public and not you know not your own thing. But yes, there's an attitude that a lot of us get, especially when we go to those places that are highly utilized. It's frustrating. There was a video that was going around yesterday of this gentleman who was given a rant. Anybody saw that yesterday? This old guy who was trying to get something done, and he needed a what was it? A utility bill, and he brought one that was 1 day past the 3 month period, and he was griping about it. but he was really, really blown away and upset. Um, so yes, I can understand that being a concern. What about crime? There was also that video making the rounds where the minister Terence Dial was caught calling in somebody indicating that he was just robbed. You all saw that? Yes, Sophia.
Yes, sir, I saw that, but Trinidad, I wish that Trinidad have some kind of system to deal with the crime because it's overbearing.
hmm I would
They,
say
it
so
don't
too.
have that kind of system. And
Yeah.
then every couple months we get a new commissioner of police.
Actually, not really. We've had one for a while, but there doesn't seem to be any longevity to these guys, and that's primarily
It
because I think,
doesn't
yeah,
because in most police stations in the central division they change inspectors every so often.
yeah, they do because it's one of the techniques they're trying to utilize to minimize the possibility of corruption in the service. Because if an inspector or senior officer stays in one district for too long, they become friendly with the individuals around them in the area and so on, and it lends itself to that type of what's the word I want to use, familiarity, which can breed some level of um, expectations on the part of some people that an officer in that senior position will be more lenient with them, that type of stuff. Nikisha, I saw your hand up as well.
So I was gonna say what you were saying just now in terms of they're trying to change them in terms of to cut
With
down on,
the
let's say,
possibility.
corruption,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
possibility of corruption. But the whole thing is nobody could come in there and stop crime. Let us be real.
hmm
No commissioner, no individual, no one person could come in and stop crime. The situation that we are presently facing with crime, I believe it's one that we have to deal with holistically as a nation. And when I say as a nation, in terms of parents taking accountability and checking up on their children, it have some parents encouraging their children in foolishness.
hmm
And we have to pay a closer eye. And then at the end of the day, the government also has a part to play because when these officers do foolishness, you're also suspending them with pay. What nonsense is that?
no, that's it's not nonsense. That is actually how the system is designed.
Yeah, well, that's
The
foolishness.
only time you can lose your pay is if you are uh, convicted of a crime or you're brought under disciplinary action. Because again, and this is what I think uh, well,
Me,
yeah,
me.
Camille is talking about. You have officers who are permanently appointed to their position because before they're permanently appointed, they go through this period of probation. But once they are permanently appointed to the position that they have and they're opening up to rank and promotion, they are very difficult to remove. There are laws governing how you go about doing it. But you're right, there's a degree of frustration when we hear somebody goes on suspension on full pay and they're on suspension for years. So literally they have another job. And this is another thing that you find happening as well. You find police officers who have multiple sources of income because the income that they're earning from the police service is insufficient to meet the needs of of their of their requirements in life, and which is actually a big issue because that actually happens to create another issue in that officers who find themselves in financial problems become susceptible to bribes because you understand what I'm talking about there, right? So the temptation is going to be there. We are hoping that their ethical value structure will stand in the way of them accepting bribes and being part of the corruption. But then you also have the issue of the culture. The culture can end up bombarding somebody of don't ask, don't say anything, and the expectation is that if you want to be a team player and the entire department is taking bribes or they're taking whatever, kickbacks or payouts. It's you're part of the game. That's the kind of thing. And then if it's happening at the police service level, it's because they're seeing that type of action taking place higher up the organization, not necessarily only in the police force. You might see it among um, the political appointees in different organizations, the politicians themselves. So it's a culture that inundates a society with the expectation that in order to get anything done, you have to pass change. We know that. I mean, we're not living in a vacuum here. We know that in a lot of instances, to get simple things done that should not cost a lot of money, you have to go into an office, find the person in charge, and pass some private money between yourself and that person to get things that you're entitled to get. But there's a long line. You follow what I talk.
Licensing, HR
License,
department,
yes,
licensing. Oh, God have
it
mercy.
happens in the licensing department. It happens in the hospitals. To get people's names moved up on an appointment list, it
So, well, that's
happens.
probably by the doctor, because it can't be by the nurses, because I ain't get a dollar a day in my life yet. My school's career.
You mightn't get money, but when your friends
None of
come
the above.
or your family members come, what happens?
You try to help them
Uh,
along.
right,
So that's
yes,
what you
yes.
mean. Okay.
Yes, and understandably so, because you know the suffering that people who come to the
Necessary.
hospitals face. So what ends up happening is that, I'll try and, get you in to see the doctor quicker, because, I'll get you in and out as much as I can and assist you. And it's not really a bad thing in the sense, but it's part of what we've come to expect. And as a result of that, it creates this dynamic in our society that the expectation is that we will always have this system of corruption or corrupt behavior that inundates every aspect of our lives here. And when we start to teach things like what we're doing in this class, we're talking about ethical stance and fairness for everybody. It fails in front of culture, and this is something that the president of the college was actually talking about it earlier. Culture kills strategic planning every day, anytime. If the culture exists in a particular manner, despite what you will plan to do or what you're trained to do, that will crumble in the face of the organizational culture that sits within the organization. All right. Now, so we're going to move off this side a little bit because what happens is, as a result of the failure of our leaders to tackle the problems, it creates something that the text refers to as the anti-leadership virus or vaccine. I think of it as a virus, but it's an anti-leadership vaccine. The reason for it is because when they disappoint us, we get upset with them. We start to be distrustful of them. We get, disgusted of their behavior. We don't trust them. Like yesterday, a lot of one of the things about the video with the Minister of Health who got robbed on the side of the road was, immediately coming out of that, there's this meme that's running around with this song that, literally is almost saying, it serve you right. Now you understand what we're going through. That kind of situation. And that's the kind of reaction people have to. Wow, yes, okay, I'd agree. Yeah, the Borderland and Revenue, National Insurance Board, yes, those especially the Border and Land Revenue comes up under those things there. That's a very good comment. Quite true, actually. I've come across that myself a few times. Well, in doing business with them. So we don't trust them anymore. And what ends up happening, we heap a lot of criticism and a lot of disgust on these individuals. Now, what that causes as a knock-on effect in terms of the anti-leadership virus or vaccine is that it discourages people from taking up leadership positions in society because they don't want to deal with the headache of it. And as a result, what we end up happening is the people who are probably best qualified and best suited for taking up those positions no longer offer themselves up for it. And what we end up happening is that you have less qualified, less deserving people taking those positions up and making generally a mess of things. You all follow what I'm talking about? Or what the text is trying to tell us? That creates that anti leadership vaccine, which then leads to a lowering of the standards of the types of leaders that we actually are faced with, which then adds to the frustration. So it's like a never ending cycle of poor leadership leading to more distrust and disgust, causing more and more people to walk away from taking leadership positions because they just don't want to deal with the frustration, the anxiety, even the mudslinging that takes place, and the mental battle that's dealing with it. So it in itself it creates this force that drives the best people for leadership out of the system. It pushes people away from it, and that's something that we have to actually need to deal with as part of the problem. So, given that circumstance, in studying leadership, a couple of myths have developed, and we want to kind of look into the situation there. The first thing that we have to understand is that when we look at the way in which the theories were developed, a lot of them developed in relation to the context in which we are practicing leadership. So if we go from place to place, different styles of leadership need to be utilized. Different options become useful because in a political environment, you can't use the same type of leadership strategies and techniques that you might use in a classroom environment. Similarly, you may not be able to use those classroom tactics in a social organization, be it like something like a voluntary organization in particular. Similarly, in a corporate organization, a business activity, there are different types of leadership strategies that you can utilize that will not work in any other environment. And those are the things that we have to pay attention to when we try to evaluate what is leadership and how it works. So a couple of the myths that we want to kind of dispel: leaders are born, not made. Leadership is hierarchical, and you must have formal positions and status to be considered a leader. You have to be charismatic to be an effective leader. There's one particular right way of doing things. It's impossible for you to be a manager and a leader simultaneously, and you need only have common sense to be an effective leader. So, what is the truth about these things? Leaders are born, not made. The 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 reality is that, and this is a topic you all will be debating in hopefully for in the debate exercise. Um, we contend in this time and day, and in this program, that leadership is not a born prerequisite. You might be born with some innate characteristics, setting you aside as potential leadership. But unless you do the development, the training, and the other necessary things, you will not be a good leader. More importantly, anybody with basic set of intellectual tools can develop leadership based on training, because we don't come out of the womb, with everything ready and willing and think to lead the army and become a leader. We have to develop based upon the environment that we find ourselves emerging in, and the training we received along the way, and the skills that we develop based upon our various forms of education that we go through. So the first myth we want to dispel is that leaders are born. So that's not true. Leadership is something that can be developed and made. So that's the first thing. Leadership occurs at all levels of the organization, which means that you don't necessarily need to have an official position to become a leader. In most modern organizations, they've been striving to get rid of that hierarchical system because it sort of blocks communication. Not sort of, it stands in the way of effective communication within organizations and slows down their ability to respond to the needs of the organization, to the changes around them. So it stagnates companies. So what has happened in a lot of instances is that the more progressive organizations really create these little teams, and each team has a team lead, and that team lead rotates around the membership of the team based upon the types of projects that they're working on. All right, especially if they have a cross-functional, and there's a group that's going to be looking at teams and groups. If you have what we call cross-functional teams, which is a team made up of people with different skill sets from different parts of the organization, you'd find that based upon the type of activity you're involved with, somebody from that particular area, skill area, will take the lead based upon the nature of the project that you're working on. So let's say you have somebody in a team from, and the team is made up of somebody from HR, somebody from finance, somebody from production, somebody from maintenance, and possibly some other department, maybe sales. So that when there are issues dealing with human resource issues or problems, then the HR person is likely to take the lead. As opposed to that, if there's a production issue, then the person in production will probably take the lead, or maintenance, depending upon the nature of what the problem is. But you'd understand how those teams are de-emphasizing the importance of the leader and focusing on the ability of the people working in the organization to work as a team. Now, this simply means that leadership is not something that is resident only at the higher levels of the organization. It means that leadership can happen or is happening throughout the organization at all levels, be it the lower levels or the higher levels. It doesn't matter. People are taking the initiative to take leadership positions and make decisions that are useful for the organization to move forward with achieving its goals. We understand that. Anybody has ever worked in an organization that has this type of structure that faces them? Yes, no, maybe. Anybody is fortunate to work in an organization like this? Or have you been primarily working in organizations that have that very hierarchical system of leadership? Come, some of you are working. Somebody had to say something. Yes, Camille.
I've always worked. No, as it is right now, I am having my own business, but all
Right,
my experiences before has been in places where I've had persons over me that I have to report to.
right.
Never worked in a flat, you know.
A flat organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a very popular structure to use in Trinidad. That speaks volumes towards the level of trust that leadership has of its membership in terms of the organization. That's really poor, though. Miss Nelson, I know we sometimes you get a little scared when I call Camille, but Miss Nelson, you have anything to contribute in this area? Can you contribute, actually?
Not really, sir. I don't have much experience. I
You
don't
don't
know.
work,
No, I'm at home at the moment. I
but
work part
mhm.
time. Part time, I work. I work
Right, but
part.
what type of organization do you work with in part time?
Well, I work with URP, but it's be on and off work.
Right,
It
that was
doesn't.
actually one of my first jobs. Actually, when I started working, was with
Yeah,
URP.
it's like one of my first jobs right now. You could say too, because
Yeah,
I have a lot of responsibility at home too.
right. But you work where? In the office, or you work out on the
I work as a checker.
Right. Okay. Right. No, that makes sense because I worked in payroll. Um,
Okay.
that was a scary time for me.
And even in that office, it have a lot of controversial, like
Yes, it
people.
does, and it's simply
It's
because it's one of
like a small part of the government, but it
it
have a
is
lot of
bacchanal.
corruption. Yes, Bacchanal. I wanted to say
Eh,
Bacchanal.
what
Yeah.
what what constituency you working in?
Princeton.
Okay, because URP, sorry, URP has a lot of political backlash with it. So you
Mm.
need to be careful, play your cards right, or else you'll get replaced very quickly. That happened to me actually.
Well, I just holding on till something better come
Yeah,
along.
yeah, I understand, but it's a good place to start. But what you're learning about is the public sector culture in that organization.
Yeah.
Um, I remember learning it the hard way because I got because you're supposed to rotate 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, right?
Yeah.
Right,
Actually, it's a fortnight, and
fortnight.
always work. Three
Right, that's a
fortnight and three fortnight to home.
right. So okay, that's cool. That's changed a little bit since my time. We were supposed to rotate 2 fortnights on. They simply just rotated me off and never brought me back on. So that was quite interesting. But I knew it was going to happen because I'd kind of opened a can of worms nobody wanted to see. Um,
Yeah. It's
however,
over the commerce and
oh yeah, yeah, and
a lot of
and
ladies. I just try to keep my distance. I just work and
yeah, mine's got a little dangerous though. I kind of because I found some irregularities. I was working in the area of URP head office, and I was working on check reconciliation, and I started to find some, let's say, things I ought not to have found, and I spoke about it when I should not have spoken about it, and it got dangerous. And being just a lowly clerk, I can't do anything about it. But when I drew
is it
attention,
now start to work and like you don't know the background where you come
correct, yeah,
into the work like with an innocent mind
that was
genuinely.
it. That is it exactly. I went in there with innocence and I did some things and I said,
Because I had
"Wow."
a supervisor wanted to control me, but she moved to a different section, thank God. Also, I might have lost my job. So,
Mm, all
yeah.
right. I mean, we learned some powerful lessons growing up. I mean, at the time, it might feel like the end of the world, but honestly, it wasn't. It was part of the learning experience along the way.
True.
Okay. All right. So, let's look at the next truth. Charisma is not necessary to be an effective leader. In fact, charisma is seen as one of those questionable characteristics that leaders can have. Now, the problem with charisma is that you can't say you have charisma. Other people have to tell you you have charisma. Um, Now, you can set yourself up to be charismatic, which means speak in a particular way, try to present yourself in a particular way. But true charisma is something that is attributed to somebody, but not something that they can attribute to themselves. And that is a problem because the reaction of people towards you is one that is emotional. And when we get emotions involved with leadership and leadership decisions, sometimes we can get some very, well, subjective and dangerous types of activities taking place, especially if leaders are admired to the point where people um, can't separate good and bad, and that is a problem that we have to pay attention to because in Drucker's experience here, he observed in the last century, in the 20th century, the three most charismatic leaders in that century caused the most amount of suffering in the human race. That was Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, and they were all three seen as very charismatic individuals in their own domains. Hitler, in particular, and Mao, because we didn't pay a lot of attention to the Chinese experience of how they arrived through the Chinese Revolution. Those individuals and their charisma in terms of among their people led to a lot of heartache for those societies, Stalin in particular. And it wasn't with strange people. Hitler had a broader impact because it was not only in Germany but around the world that he had an impact. But Stalin and Mao in particular, really they impacted upon their own populations in Russia and in China, respectively. Okay, something to think about. So when we look at charismatic leaders, here are a couple. Now, there are three here that are easily recognizable. You have Hitler, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, I should say. Um, and one of the things you recognize with all of these individuals is that they came to violent ends because of the what they represented at the end of the day. Can anybody recognize the individual in the lower left corner? Anybody knows him?
Yes.
I am.
Lizelle, I'm not making out what you're saying. You're kind of breaking up a bit. Try that again. Anybody else? No? Okay, so let me help you all. That is the Right Reverend. Um, um, God, all of a sudden his name just gone. Um,
Sir Jimmy Swaggart.
no, although
Oh,
he might have been an interesting one to put there. This one is more dangerous. Um, for the life of me, I've been teaching this all week, and all of a sudden his name just gone whoop from my mind. Um, uh, Jim Jones. Wow, wow. Where did that go? Sorry, senile moment there. You're familiar with the Right Reverend Jim Jones?
I've heard the name before.
Okay, so you haven't obviously drunk the Kool-Aid,
Yes, I know about that.
right?
He's a cult leader.
Right. Well, he didn't start off as a cult leader. He was a charismatic leader who led a group of people into what he called the Promised Land, and um, believed that he was being persecuted by the CIA and the government of the United States, especially the Inland Revenue. And he took his people and his following and went to Guyana and negotiated a purchase of land in Guyana called Jonestown. And there he was visited by people. You must have seen movies about this. And eventually convinced everybody that the government was on the way to kill everybody and take what they wanted and rape their children and so on. So convinced everybody there to drink Kool-Aid mixed with cyanide. Some people were shot actually as well. So, and there was this mass suicide that blew the world apart. That is one of the negative things, along with Hitler, we could look at in terms of the negative side of charisma. It's actually one group is going to deal with this called the black hat of charisma. And the reason for that is because charisma is an emotional response that people have to leaders around them. So be careful with people who are charismatic, because if charismatic people aren't brought in check, it creates problems. And time again, we've seen examples of this behavior all the time. All right. Okay, so the myth about there being only one way to lead, that's absolutely nonsensical. Um, there are many different methods of leadership that can be utilized, and that method and style of leadership is really dependent on the individual and their influences, their gender, their cultural identity, the value systems that they bring to bear on it, as well as the training that they've received. So you might find people with a military background has a different approach to doing things. Women in classrooms might have a different approach to a man in the classroom and the way they go about doing things. People who culturally come from different parts of the world, so Eastern culture, you did find a different methodology being utilized as opposed to Western culture. So there's a whole host of things, and that can create different methods of doing it the right way. So there's no one way that's right. The distinction of management and leadership. So the first thing is that if we focus on what is management as opposed to what is leadership. So management is really focused on the achieving of the organizational goals by engaging in some sort of transactional or motivational approaches to organizing the resources, primarily the human resource of the organization, and getting the best out of them to be able to meet the needs of the organization. So management is focused its attention on doing things the way that the organization wants it done. Leadership, on the other hand, is where we are focused on a broader perspective of making sure that what we're doing as an organization is right globally, right for everybody across the board. So the statement here: managers are preoccupied with doing things the right way, whereas leaders are focused on doing the right thing. That's a big distinction between the two. However, most managers in positions of authority engage in both types of activities. And this actually brings us into the concept that management and leadership doesn't happen every minute of every day. It happens in little spurts along the way. In fact, it's referred to as episodic leadership. So when a manager is in his office working on a memo, working on a timesheet, working on some plans and that's organizational. But if he's in the office or she's in the office talking to somebody, helping them to navigate through making decisions, that's a leadership activity. They're running a meeting and they're presenting plans for the future and so on, and organizing people together to work towards a given objective. Those are leadership types of activities. So the concept was very simple. Yes, you can be a manager and a leader, but it doesn't mean that you're a manager and a leader simultaneously. Sometimes the activities are closely related, and other times they're disparate in terms, or disparate in terms of where and how you're doing it. But the fact of the matter is that the myth of management and leadership being different and that you can't be both is untrue. All right. So we could move off of this. Leadership is obviously, this course would not exist if leadership it wasn't teachable, and that actually speaks to the last one that we were looking at here, common sense. If it was only common sense that was required for you to be a leader, then everybody would be leaders. But the fact of the matter is that leadership requires training, it requires experience, it requires a lot of effort on the part of the persons or individuals who are taking the opportunity and taking the challenge of leading up into into bringing to bear in the decision making process all of the experiences, all of the mistakes you've made in the past, all of the past good and bad activities into your process of a leader. Learning from mistakes and learning from your successes, that's important. And it's why we say leadership is a teachable activity, and it requires more than just common sense. You have specific things that are required for you, especially if there's um, um, specific technical skills that you're required to think. So we're going to start looking at the origin of leadership and the movement of its theory over time. So the word leader can be traced back to the English language to about the 1300s. All right, that's a long time ago. And the word leadership emerged in about the 1800s and was primarily utilized in the political sphere, meaning that it was really around leadership of organization, well, not organizations, but leadership of countries and government. And back in that time frame, most leadership tended to be of a monarch type system or feudal systems where there was one individual in charge, a king, a queen, or some warlord who was in charge of things. So you'd find that the that is the context in which the word leadership arose. By the 1900s, there were very few. The beginning of the 19th century, the 20th century, 1990, well, 1900 to 1929, there were very few definitions. But by the 1980s, the amount of definitions that could be found went up to 108, 110. Sorry. As we moved on, we then found ourselves with 221 definitions found in books primarily coming out of academia. Um, then we have, coming up again, 366 publications on leadership that didn't even include a definition. So, I mean, in terms of how it was defined, sometimes you didn't even bother to define it. All right. So, one of the early definitions that was utilized in the 1900s, the early 1900s, which is 1906 to 1907, was from Mumford, and he defined leadership as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control of societal phenomena. So, so Mumford is defining the leader as a controller of events and an infers control over people. I like to ascribe this to the puppet master. So, this is one of those, I would say, very dark type of definitions where it infers some level of secrecy of a group of individuals or one individual controlling others through any sort of machinations that they're able to put together to be able to get people to do the things that they want. despite probably knowing better. All right. So along the lines of Mumford, you would expect concepts like Machiavellian um, leadership techniques, which was coming out of um, the same earlier periods in the 18th century and so on. Those are the kind of definitions that you'd get with it. How many people still see leadership from this perspective of Mumford, this master of puppets in and around us?
In
Anybody
the
sees that
hospital.
in the hospital? You have a master of puppets.
Let's try.
This,
They do
this,
try. Yes, they do.
I, it does appear that way sometimes. That where you go in an organization, there's the preeminence of one or a few individuals over the entire group. That's quite true. And that really kind of speaks to a very, if that is the case, it means that the organization is fairly ancient,
The
because
individual.
in yeah, they're fairly ancient in their view of what leadership ought to be. So I can imagine working with that individual is not an easy task. All right. So, as opposed to that definition, more contemporary definitions like the one we've been dealing with the relational leadership model focuses on the relationship between leaders and followers, based on mutual goals, working towards the achievement of some action or some change. That is the more contemporary approach to things, and we're going to see that evolution of 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 the theory as they move through. More importantly, the focus from the earlier time to now will shift away from focus on the leader themselves to the leader and the follower. And in fact, in one of the theories, the follower becomes the more critical element in evaluating the theory that they're going to be looking at. So we're going to see some transitions that take place in terms of the thinking about leadership as we move through the years. All right. Um, in working through, we're going to be drawing upon the influence of a number of areas of academic study: anthropology, psychology, history, sociology, the arts, and philosophy. And we're going to, the vast majority of the modern or contemporary models will be coming together of all of these different approaches to evaluating the behaviors and actions of leaders and leadership in general. Okay, so those theories that we're going to be looking at will, of course, be a very interesting one that we're going to be looking at. We will come to the understanding that there is no one correct definition of leadership, and it really is going to force us to focus on defining leadership in the context of the situation that the leadership is being practiced in. So, as we said before, different leadership is different to everybody based upon where it's practiced and with whom it's practiced, and that's going to give us this sort of flexibility across the board that we want to be looking for. Now, in order to try and understand leadership or define it a little more clearly, instead of using a direct definition, what was tended to be utilized was a metaphoric type thing. So, a metaphor, for those of us who have English backgrounds, is a, anybody willing to explain what a metaphor is? Um, I'm ashamed to call the same people I've been talking to all the time, but Camille McLean.
Yeah, my understanding of a metaphor is using something
Uh,
to kind of help somebody, so help your audience understand something else.
right.
So
By
somebody will say, will use an example, and they will say that this is a metaphor from a life or
okay.
something like.
Wow. Okay. So
I
how is
mean,
a
I'm
metaphor?
happy to explain it simpler than that, but somehow the words not coming to me.
Yeah. Okay. How's a metaphor similar to a simile?
A
D-
simile
d-
is when they say something is like something else.
right. And a metaphor is.
So it is
Uh,
used like terms to describe human terms to describe objects.
No, that's personification. Um,
Oh,
Sophia, I see your hand up. Go ahead. Just jump in.
So a metaphor and a simile is basically like comparing other stuff, but simile you're putting in like. So for
Or as.
example, and
Hmm.
is as pretty as a hungry
Pig.
bear or something like.
Yeah. All right. Where
And
a
a
metaphor,
metaphor is thing, but you're not using it like that, like a simile.
right? The way we explain it, and I know. All right. Let's see. Camille again has a hand up. Go ahead, Camille. Redeem
I
yourself.
don't know if this will help, but where simile is more literal
Direct. It's
and a
direct.
metaphor is more symbolic.
Right. So the phrase we use when we explain or the definition is a simile is a comparison using as or like, whereas a metaphor is a comparison that is not fully stated or is implied. All right. So we don't say that leadership is like consensus. We said the consensus metaphor of leadership is one where we look for consensus among the individuals to agree in a particular manner. So it's what we call a comparison that's not fully stated. That makes sense now? For those of you who remember your English, you all would have done this at well, in my days, the first time I came across these particular things when I was doing literature in Form 4 and Form 3. You all did those things back in the days of
yes,
of high
long
school.
Yes,
time,
sir.
2004, 2005.
yes,
Yeah, well,
sir.
I was before you. I was in the 80s, so I mean, that's well back then. All right. So my point being is that these are metaphors that are obviously comparisons with different things that people might know. So when you talk about leadership to business people, you might utilize the comparative of the competitive market. So when we talk about the competitive market, somebody in business will understand that in a competitive market, the strongest firm rises to the top and leads the market based upon their positioning in the market, the quality of their product, the ability to gather the most amount of sales. That is how leadership arrives there. Um, if we look at the democratic metaphor, that is where you have a system where leadership is based upon voter popularity, um, as opposed to consensus, which is not the same. Consensus is where you arrive in leadership positions, or leadership is determined by the ability of the individuals in leadership to convince everybody in the organization to support them. All right. So those are the kinds of metaphors that they were utilizing. Now we don't need to memorize all these metaphors, but the one that comes up a lot is the metaphor of the orchestra or the symphony. So when we look at this picture here, we see this gentleman in the middle, the conductor, who is seen or identified clearly in the picture as the person who's leading, he's conducting, right? But if we look around him, there's a lot of people, maybe 20 or 30 people around him, and these are only those that are in the frame, playing all sorts of different instruments. And his responsibility is to get all of them to work together and to perform at their best to be able to make the entire orchestra sound really good. Now, this might be a little more complicated in terms of this big band type of orchestration, but Dupree utilizes a smaller metaphor of the jazz musician, and he describes the jazz band leader as the person who must select the music that they're going to play, find the right musicians, and then perform in public. But he's dependent upon a lot of other things: the place that they're playing, the environment, the volunteers that he has playing in the band, which is the members of his group, the need for everybody to perform both as individuals but also within the group, and they have to mesh well with each other. The absolute dependence of the leader on the members of the band, and the need of the leader for the followers to all play well. Now, if that doesn't happen, then we're going to say the band sounds like crap. All right. Now this can be from a large band or to a very small band. Anybody here has any sort of musical background, performs with like a group or anything like that in any format, vocals, playing an instrument?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Nikisha, give us your circumstance.
So it's like Chris Barbosa Music School,
Uh huh.
and yes, he has a very hard, very difficult job. It
Mm-hmm.
is very difficult
Right,
because
but what is your experience with him? What do you do with him?
my experience, I sing,
Right.
and my experience with him, he's very gentle. He speaks to everybody very kind.
Mm-hmm.
He's very gentle with us. He
Mm-hmm.
tries to have a different approach. So he tries to figure out how to deal with each member because everybody has a different personality. And I think that's the hardest part there.
Oh yes, definitely.
Trying
Yeah.
to trying to be able to talk to everybody because you want the sopranos to keep at that level, you want the tenors to come out with the
Mm-hmm.
bass forward, but at the
Yep.
same time you want to get the best out of everybody. So you don't want to sound like if you're buffing them or if you're coming down on them, but you
Correct.
want to have like a kind of, what could I say, like a friendly relationship. Yeah.
Yes. Almost a family like.
Right. You want to have a kind of family grooved relationship type.
Yep. That's it.
So,
Okay.
if you're
So
correcting, you're not correcting in a harsh manner, but you're
right.
going to
So
correct it and
so
make it make
so
sense.
look at this statement the pre makes and see if you can equate what he's saying here to the behavior of your band leader. The leadership metaphor is powerful in illustrating inclusiveness, valuing individuality, showing the importance of the public good, that is, sounding good, and empowering people to realize their gifts and talents. Does this sounds a lot like what you were describing of your band
Yep.
leader. All right.
Yeah.
So tell him Dupree's been describing him since 1992, and you feel appreciated. I'm certain. All
I
right.
shall it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's a good example of a good leader because he's working with you guys despite everybody's different types of characterization, different attitudes. He's working together to get the best from everybody, and that is not an easy thing because it takes a lot of sacrifice on his behalf. But he also has to show some degree of skill to be able to say to people, okay, I need to correct this here, and this is why he wants it to be corrected because he's looking at making sure the show is one that everybody's going to want to listen to, that's going to want to hear. Anybody else has any musical um, experiences that they'd like to share, playing with a band in particular? Playing an instrument by yourself is one thing, but playing with other people is a totally different experience, huh? Anybody? Nobody? All right. Going once, going twice. All right, so let's move along. Another metaphor is the episodic metaphor, and I spoke about this a little earlier when I said that management and leadership was was not something that takes place all the time. But it's the same thing with leadership. Leadership is time specific, it's place specific, it's context specific. Individuals experience leadership in episodic moments. It means that Ross here is talking about leadership is something that happens in little spurts all over the place. It is not something that is constantly taking place. I mean, if that was the case, leaders will burn out real quick. All right. So it's 10 minutes here, half an hour there, 15 minutes there. So that's the metaphor here. Leadership is an episodic activity. It's something that takes a little bit of your time. Now, anybody here in a supervisory position, working in a supervisory type of position? No? Camille, and I'm drawing on you again because you're running your own business. Do you find yourself rotating through different activities simultaneously or throughout the day when you're working on your own business activities?
Absolutely.
Right. So it's
Because
episodic. Sometimes you're
everything.
right. So sometimes you're down in the trenches like a general worker and you're all getting things done. Other times you, oh wait, no, we need to fix this, that type of stuff. Take charge. All right. So again, Even in running a family, it's the same thing. Your mom is not the leader of the household every second. Sometimes your mom and your dad, you have a conversation, and during that conversation, they're more like a counselor. They're more like a friend. But I mean, it doesn't mean that they are your friend or your thing, but they're still, your mom, and you're having or your dad, and you're having a relationship with them. But there are times when they take up that leadership mantle when things need to get done, oh, go and solve about this, or go and see about that. So, but it's not every second of every day that they're mom or dad. All right. So we can draw from what we've been looking at so far that leadership is a very complex and is very elusive in the sense that we can't necessarily nail it down. There are lots of different academics that lend itself to trying to explain it and trying to understand it. And what we're going to see is that leadership really started to get its teeth in when behavioral scientists and social scientists started the process of trying to evaluate what is leadership and develop theories about it. So what ended up happening coming out of these things is really these theories that we're going to go through now. The great man theory, the trait theory, the behavioral approaches, the situational contingency approach, the influencers theory, reciprocal leadership theory. And what I want to do is I want to take a chance and kind of change things a little bit. And I want to go to a little video clip that might help to move us a little faster through this, um, and see if we could maybe, possibly, where am I? All right, now I tend to get all right, let's see if we get this running.
With Asana,
Can you guys
you
hear
can
this?
drive clarity and impact at scale
Yes, sir.
by connecting
Yep.
work and
Okay.
workflows
The video
to
should play in a little bit.
company-wide goals. Asana, a smarter way to work. Try it for free.
Leadership traits and skills. Academics also started to identify the traits of leaders to see what common
Oops,
characteristics.
hold up. I have to start it over. Sorry.
An introduction to leadership theory. Here is a short introduction to some of the most important leadership theories, trends and models. These can all be instructive in understanding your own leadership style, broadening your expertise and giving you tools to improve as a manager. Great man theory. The great man theory is one of the oldest theories in leadership. It is the idea that true leaders, or heroes, are born with the innate ability to shape history. Thomas Carlyle was a historian, and he came up with a theory based on the examples of key historical figures such as Napoleon Bonaparte. However, this premise that leaders are born not made has largely been refuted. The main importance of this theory is that it reveals how we have traditionally seen leaders. Carlyle's work also gave impetus to the study of leadership and development of further leadership theories. Control and domination, power and influence. Great man theory was linked to the idea of power and that leaders would naturally dominate others by the strength of their personality. This school of leadership theory is summed up in Moore's definition of leadership from 1927. He defined leadership as the ability to impress the will of the leader on those led and induce obedience, respect, loyalty and cooperation. The point to note here is that there's no reference to the responsibility of a leader for their followers or to any moral code. It took the extreme abuses of power by the likes of Hitler, Mao and Stalin in the first half of the 20th century for these ideas of leadership to be properly challenged. Leadership traits and skills. Academics also started to identify the traits of leaders to see what common characteristics made a good leader. In the early iterations of the theory, these traits were also seen as inherited and linked to the idea of the great man, the charismatic male hero who was tall and good-looking. This school of thinking evolved into identifying more positive traits such as integrity, moral courage and humility. Importantly, there was also a shift towards characteristics that could be developed. As the emphasis moved from innate to acquired characteristics, the focus moved to identify leadership skills and behaviours that could be learned, such as communication, strategic thinking, and decision-making. Action-centered leadership. John Adair's action-centered leadership model was built on the premise that leadership skills and behaviours could be taught and adopted. The simple idea behind action-centered leadership is the need to balance the three core management priorities of task, team, and individual. A good leader must continually seek to achieve the task, build the team, and support the development of each individual. Transactional and transformational leadership theories. James McGregor Byrne took the ideas of influence and behaviour in another direction when he defined the difference between transactional and transformational leadership in 1978. Transactional leadership is management using a carrot and stick approach. This functional style relies on basic human needs such as income and job security. These elements are related to the lower end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Transformational leadership goes beyond transactional leadership. This type of leader seeks to inspire people with a compelling vision and lead them towards self-actualization at the top of the Maslow pyramid. Bernard Bass built on the work of Burns and defined the key behaviours of the transformational leader as being a positive role model, providing encouragement, and supporting followers to fulfill their potential. Situational leadership theory. The situational leadership model, developed by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard, took leadership theory in another slightly different direction. Their model is about having a flexible approach. It demonstrates how a leader can adapt their management style depending upon the experience of the team and the individuals they are working with, while also considering the environment and circumstances they find themselves in. The leader chooses their approach, either delegating, supporting, coaching, or directing, depending upon the situation. Values-based leadership. Values-based leadership developed in response to various moral failings of prominent leaders. This school of leadership, related to trait theory, encompasses both servant leadership and authentic leadership models. The central idea is that the values-based leader has a strong moral compass and leads according to their personal values and the shared values of their organization or community. This model stresses the importance of being a good leader, not just a charismatic one, and the ability to make the right or ethical decisions, not just effective or bold choices. Servant leadership theory. The idea of the servant as leader was developed by Robert Greenleaf. This model of servant leadership is primarily about motivation. The servant leader wants to serve others and society by raising up new leaders and helping people to move towards a positive vision of the future. They are not seeking power for themselves. Instead, servant leaders share power and empower others. Toxic or bad leaders. At the other end of the scale, academics also started to identify the opposite of values-based or good leaders. Marcia Lynn Wicker popularized the term toxic leader, and various models have been developed to identify such bad leadership. For example, Barbara Kellerman's study identified 7 types of bad leader. These are incompetent, rigid, intemperate, callous, corrupt, insular, or evil. Authentic leadership theory. The term authentic leadership was first popularized by leadership practitioner Bill George. He wrote a book by the same name in response to failures of senior corporate management, such as the fraudulent behavior that led to the fall of energy giant Enron. George advocated for leaders of purpose, values, and integrity, rather than those motivated by greed and power. George's academic colleagues, Bruce Avolio and William Gardner, then developed models around this concept, identifying the key behaviors or traits of an authentic leader. These included self-awareness and self-regulation, balanced processing of information, relational transparency, and a strong sense of morality. So that is a very quick introduction to some of the key leadership schools, theories, and models. Theory can be a little dry, but understanding these models is important. They help to give us language and concepts that help us reflect on our own leadership experience and the conduct of others. They give us tools to help and to use in our own leadership practice, and they also act as signposts of ways that we can help to develop and grow other leaders. And you can start now. Take a few minutes to reflect. Which of the leadership theories are most intriguing to you? What does this model reveal about your own leadership? Which tool could you apply in the interactions that you have today?
Right. So you guys, was that cool? You all got the gist of the issues there? Yes, maybe no. Everybody's hearing me now.
We made USAA for homeowners who like being
Hold on,
Yes,
ready.
sir.
That's why we have safety tips for things like fires.
I said stop. Close this off video. All right. So there are a couple of theories that they covered here. Let me talk about. Right. Um, One of the things they didn't really talk about was the context in which these theories developed, and but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, except to indicate to you some general things about it. So, as he talked about the great man theory and the trait theory, they were pretty close to each other in terms of the context in which they started, basically, in terms of understanding. So the great man theory focused on those great people that they observed during time. But the theory was developed in the context of what at that point in time a popular system of measuring or scientific thinking, which was Darwinistic thinking. Now, anybody here is familiar with Darwin and what his theories were? And anybody remembers the name of his theories? All right, so to move us along, Darwin's theories were based upon evolution and natural selection and survival of the fittest. You all, that sounds familiar? Yes? No? Maybe? Huh? You are hearing me, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Just not willing to say anything. All right, so basically, what we found is that in a lot of the instances here, the theories that were developed were influenced by the prevailing scientific thinking at the time. So Darwin really spoke to the survival of the fittest, and this is where we start to get into some very tricky areas here that they presented and really go into, which were underlying the thinking processes that went on here. So when we talk about the great man theory, they were talking about genetics. So really, it stayed with the concept that you had to be born a leader. And when a group of individuals moved into leadership positions, and this was primarily geared towards men, you'd notice that a lot of this stuff was about men and not men and women. That lineage had to be maintained in order for the perceived leadership quality to remain present in the organization or to remain present in the country. So this had to do with kings. So a king must leave offspring in order to maintain his place on the crown. And in order to maintain the purity of their blood, it led to a fair amount of interbreeding. And if anybody here, well, Nikisha, you have a medical type background, you recognize that interbreeding actually weakens the genetics of an individual. They become more susceptible to different types of issues, and in fact, can lead to mental disturbances and so on. Would you agree with that, Nikisha?
So,
Yes, interbreeding weakens the blood strain of an individual.
a bit.
a, a bit, okay.
One second.
So much so that interbreeding, when we talk about that as incest, was outlawed as a result of the negative medical impact it has on people, and that's how bad it was. Now, of course, the theory spoke about great men, as the name suggests. So if there were great women like Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, and Queen of Scots, and those people, forget about them. They didn't exist. They were anomalies. So the theory had nothing to say about great women. The traits approach, which then superseded the the great man's approach, was again they were trying to observe what were the characteristics of these leaders, and they came up with a list. Huh? Just that's letting you know. So it had to be man, first off, not women. They had to be judged as being intelligent. They had to have a particular height, display a certain amount of self-confidence, and of course have that charisma that that they spoke about. But the authors here would not go on to explain the other characteristics that became very critical, which was they were white, they came from an Aryan area. This is the thinking at the time. So this is where a form of science that built off of Darwinism came up, which is eugenics. Anybody here is familiar with that concept of eugenics?
Never
No?
heard before.
Eugenics? Wow. Okay, so eugenics is the study of genes, and it determined that there were particular genes that were, as I said, desirable. So if you wanted to ensure that you had children of a particular desirability, you would select individuals with whom you would breed based upon the possibility of those traits becoming predominant, such as skin color, eye color, hair color, height, levels of intelligence, and so on. It also meant that there were certain individuals that were deemed to be subhuman, and that would have included people of color, black people, um, Indians, anybody who was gay, anybody who was what's the word I was going to use, disabled in any form of the other, be it a physical deformity, speech defects. All those things were looked upon as being weaknesses that had to be bred out of your culture. This was also part of the thinking that led us into the actions of Adolf Hitler during World War II, where there was the broad understanding within the German Reich that Jews and gays and gypsies and black people and anybody who was not Aryan were to be eliminated from the face of the earth so that the pure race of humanity would benefit from it. So I'm hoping you're understanding the context in which trait theory and great man theory kind of gave rise to. Obviously, we had failing that failed, and then the behavioral approaches started to come up, which again he spoke about. So I don't think I need to really go through the behavioral approaches as much as before. So in essence, in behavioral approaches, they were just simply trying to observe, because the trait theory failed for the simple reason that they were unable to find this list of traits that every leader in time had historically. So the evidence didn't prove it to be correct. And in fact, by the end of the World War II, trait theory kind of disappeared altogether because it was kind of based upon a lot of faulty science. All right, eugenics turns out in fact, interestingly enough, eugenics is still one of those things that they argue towards white supremacy. Yeah? Just for your information. Um, and we have to tackle and confront a lot of these stereotypical types of activities that has gone in life. So the if we look at behavioral theories, we'd see that behavioral theories actually kind of started up in the 1950s and 60s. Now, this is after World War II, so let's get the context here now. And this is the part that's missing from the overview that was given in the video. In the 1950s and 60s, the world is recovering from the World War that ended in 1945. Especially with and what came up there is the atomic age, because in 1945 you had the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So now there's this spectra of world devastation. So you have this particular issue. You also had the Cold War start between Russia and the rest of the world, basically, and the Soviet Union. So you also had the spectra of communism. So the 1950s was fraught with a lot of anxiety, and 60s, but more importantly, the 50s and 60s saw the rebuilding of Europe after the war, in the 50s in particular, and the emergence of the United States as the most developed country in the world and the one that led technology, because primarily the United States was unharmed in the vast amount of war. The only area that was really bombed directly by Hitler and their allies was the Pearl Harbor at the beginning of the war. But the mainland and its productive force was available in the 1950s, and they had also recovered from the Great Depression of the 1920s. So you had a country that was booming, and in that boom period, what what led the way was factory production and the creation of the what we call specialization and task orientation in terms of the job place. So you had automation taking place in the form of specialized work. So you were in an assembly line, and all day long you did the same thing over and over again, one job all the time, and that led to an increase in output and increase in productivity. And of course, that increase in productivity led to an increase in wealth accumulation by the individuals returning from the war and so on. Now, so with this is the nature in which behavioral theory came up. So they would go into these industries and try to make observations about what the good leaders were doing and measure it against what the bad leaders were doing, and seeing, what were the behaviors that came up. So you had a number of theories that were developed. You had the as we talked about here before, at Ohio State and University of Michigan, they came up with the two areas of consideration behavior and initiating structure behavior. Consideration obviously being those that behaviors that impacted directly upon the individuals they were working with, and the initiating structure was anything you did towards the achieving of the organizational activities. Then you had another theory that came up here from Blake and Morton, who came up with the two-factor approach: concern for people, concern for production, and they were dividing their behaviors based upon those criteria and trying to measure what was happening. Then you had the Michigan study that identified three different types of behaviors: task-oriented behaviors, which is similar to production orientation; relationship-oriented, which was based upon the relationship between people; and participative leadership theory, activities that was the action that took place where everybody would meet as a group kind of situation. So they started to measure those things. Now, unfortunately, at the end of the day, most of these theories failed because they were too simplistic in nature, trying to explain something very complicated. And the findings were very inconclusive, because what they were finding was that there was no sets of behaviors that they could list off as, okay, you need to do X, Y, Z, yada, yada, yada. And that's led them to the conclusion that they weren't paying enough attention to the situation, which then led to the situational contingency approaches. So, okay, so we're going back to observing behavior, but we are saying, okay, we need to observe behavior, but be paying attention to the context in which that behavior is taking place. So, again, they've gone back to the factory floors. So this is again the 50s and 60s. So the vast majority of production is taking place in these large scale industries that is moving into mass production. So you have these these factory floors with this chain type production that's taking place across the board, and they're trying to make these observation of, okay, now we're looking at the factory floor, what's happening there, how is this leader behaving. Then they have to distinguish now from the factory floor to the offices. So they'll go into secretarial pools and observe what's taking place there, and start to make those kind of connections between behaviors and the context, and try to work out some theories to deal with that and try to explain what was going on. The contingency theories unfortunately ran into the same problem, um, because they were unable to explain these well, they were unable to find supporting data that was consistent between different industries, from between different individuals. And of course, one of the other problems was a lot of the stuff that they talked about were not repeatable. You'd find it in one place but not in another. So it started to get really scary, and, well, not scary, but irrelevant after a while. More importantly, during the 50s and 60s, um, behavioral science was also developmental as well. The way in which they went about trying to practice their techniques was also being developed. It wasn't like the way we have um, the way we have today, the social sciences operating, utilizing a lot of control mechanisms and that type of stuff. It was really kind of haphazard and was utilized in a lot of um, different ways, which led to a lot of inconsistencies and that type of stuff. So some of the theories coming up here, they laid some nice foundation work, but again, it wasn't something that was consistently found throughout the thing. But it did um, help in developing and moving the process of developing the observational techniques that they would utilize in the future. Um, the fact that they had to observe without being seen, that was another aspect, because we know, as basic human beings, once you know somebody's watching you, you change your behavior, and that was a problem. Camille, I see your mic open. McLean.
My mic
Question.
is open.
Yes, it is. Just kind of
Sorry,
wondering.
I didn't know that. Sorry.
That's okay. I thought you had a comment to make. I'd appreciate comments, and that makes sense. All right. So Dennis spoke about the influence theories. So he mentioned about it, but one of the founders of influence theory was actually Max Weber. Um, Max Weber, he's called Weber, not Weber. Just letting you all know because he's German. Started his observation. In particular, what he was looking at was influence theory in relation to charismatic leaders. You'd notice the dates here, they're important because 1924, and he did some of his work in 1942. This is because he spent a lot of time observing the behavior of Hitler in Germany and his rise to power and his obvious demise after that. And he was able to kind of evaluate the nature of charisma, which he spoke, which the model, the video did speak about. And further, um, Robert House went on further to kind of formalize this discussion and observations that Max Weber made. And he put forward this formal theory of charismatic leadership, um, and tried to explain it utilizing testable variables. Now, he was the one who went about identifying these characteristics, and he kind of went in a granular form in relation to this. And he started to talk about things like the shape of your face, the spacing of your eyes, those physical attributes. And again, this kind of harkened back to the eugenics type of thinking, because again, they talked about only these types of individuals can rise in, or should who have this sort of natural charismatic approach to their leadership would tend to be the ones who come forward um, as leaders in the organization or leaders in the society. And that was some. This is especially important when they looked at the political framework in which they were making these observations. So it was really important. But one of the things that he made that was really important to understand was that if the the country in particular, found itself in a position where they were undergoing a lot of problems, in that they were having, um, like in Germany, he spoke a lot about that in his work. Germany allowed Hitler, through his charismatic approach, to arrive in a position of power because Germany, in recovering from World War One, was in absolute economic ruin. And they were hampered by the fact that they had to pay all the other countries involved in World War One. Um, recom- um, they had to pay recompense. They had to pay repatriations to them to fix their damaged places and the lost people and all that, the people who got killed in the war and stuff like that. And that basically hampered the development of the recovery of Germany itself, because Germany got bombed out as well. And that led to a situation where it led to a lot of social unrest. They had it was the first time they ever experienced something called hyperinflation in Germany, where they talk about barrels of money being necessary to buy a loaf of bread and so on. Um, So they had inflation to the point of 1,000% and that type of stuff. And that obviously is a situation in which the everyday person was really catching the tail to, to survive. And that led to a lot of civil unrest. And in that midst, you have this individual who arrives with a charismatic approach to things and appeals to people by providing an explanation to their lot in life. And not only an explanation, telling them about a way to get back into a position of improvement, a position of pride, which is important, and that's something that they talk about a lot in some of his writing. If you ever look at the Third Reich or you read a book on the Third Reich and the rise, you'd understand the importance of how downtrodden the German people felt after the loss of World War One, and the way in which the League of Nations. Yes, Camille.
I was just thinking that I listened to you and it's sounding so manipulative, like as though like the person recognizes, well, Hitler in this case, he recognized the position and recognizes opportunity to get in and take advantage of people.
Well, to a point, maybe it was by design, yes, and it in hindsight it might look that way. But to me, I think if the circumstances were different, Hitler would have never risen to power. So it's sort of like all the stars aligned, and Hitler was in the right place at the right time. So much so that you remember Nostradamus predicted, or so they say in one of his quatrains, predicted the rise of Hitler. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with the writings of Nostradamus, and positioned him as the second coming of the Antichrist. So the first one being Napoleon, and there's a third one on the way. You're familiar with Nostradamus, right? Some hands could go up if
I'm
they've
not.
ever.
I'm
No,
not.
check it out. Nostradamus is supposed to be a predictor of world events. Yes, Malik and Miss Dumas. You all have something to say, or you just you've heard of Nostradamus? Anyway,
I've just heard of
Yeah,
him,
I've
but I
heard
don't have
about him.
anything to say.
all right, cool, cool. Understand. Thank you for
Yeah, no,
identifying.
he was a philosopher.
Yes, and he was seen as a prophet. All right. Okay, so coming back to what was happening here. So what House identified is that if the stars align basically, and you have a situation in which there's a lot of unrest in a country, you have people willing to challenge the status quo, and you have a charismatic leader falling in position that indicating to you that this is the right way to do things, this is how we'll get out of this mess, and this is what we need to do to ensure that we stay on top, and we remain the leaders in our society, and we take charge of our destiny. Those are the kind of phrases that you hear them using to kind of move people forward. So that charismatic thing requires that type of genesis then, and that's what House talked about. House kind of formalized the concept that charismatic leaders in that context will prove to be more um, effective given the conditions that allow for that growth to take place. So that's one of the things where you have to pay attention to do too. And one other thing that he talked about here was, um, I think I'm going backward. Sorry. One of the other things that he also identified is that when you're dealing with charismatic leaders, because it's emotional in nature, he he put this warning in place. Too much deference to individual leaders by followers creates a dangerous scenario where leaders misuse their power or deliver vision with empty dreams, and that is what people like Jim Jones did, because Jim Jones kind of focused his attention on the people in society who were, especially in American society at the time, they were middle class individuals who were having a rough time, and a lot of people of color as well joined his organization because they were able to find purpose and they were able to help each other out of the sort of morass that they found themselves being, dead end jobs, no money to be able to buy a house or to put their children to school, afford the finer things in life, and they found themselves stuck with no purpose or no ability to move on. So you have this sort of general negative feeling, and somebody comes along and says, this, if you come with me, we will be able to do this and do that. And it's sort of this slow, because it takes time to develop that pull for a leader to really pull you in and start to work on them. For those of you who might be familiar, you should also look at the um, the David Koresh story in terms of the Branch Davidians. I think the film that they call it the Waco Massacre. Pay attention to how these people arrive in their positions. I mean, in Waco, Texas, you're talking about David Koresh taking all these highly educated, intelligent people and telling them, you can no longer sleep with your wife. I am the second coming, and um, you have to give over your children and your female children and your wives to me to breed the next. It was madness. How can that happen? Even in modern times, you still have this nonsense taking place. All right, and that has to do with this kind of charismatic leadership, with this deference to the importance of the individual leader. Pay attention to some of these things, because they can and they do in fact happen in small societies. So let's leave that charismatic theory alone, because it's dangerous and thing. So come to the 1970s, and the 1970s started the beginning of this reciprocal leadership theory. Now, what was happening in the world in the 1970s? To cut a long story short, we had a cultural revolution taking place in music and in general thinking. There was a movement, the free love movement, flower power movement, the anti-war movement, the British invasion of rock music. You had the emergence of rock and roll. You had the emergence of, and there's a host of different changes. All of it focused on experimentation, drug use, the introduction of the birth control pill that allowed for a sort of sexual freedom, that allowed people to engage in sexual activity without consequence of pregnancy. Although, of course, we know there's a risk and factor involved. That whole movement of self love and mixing drugs in with that, and the importation of a lot of Eastern culture, and some of the tricky parts of it in terms of oneness with the environment, oneness with the world. That type of vibe impacted upon the development of these theories. So if you look at these theories, a lot of them are very hairy fairy, that we sort of like, we all have to be one as a people and work together. So this is where the leadership theory started to stop its focus, its intense focus on the leader, and start to look at the followers, and start to engage in a lot of examination of the follower leader relationship, and the importance of that relationship, and the fact that leaders needed to look at their ethical values, because that was another thing. In the 70s, you had a lot of civil rights movement activity taking place. You had a lot of anti-war movement. The war in Vietnam was going on, and that led to a lot of anti-establishment activities taking place. There was the period there as well when Nixon had to resign from his presidency because he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar, stealing information from the Democratic Party and so on, or the Republicans, one of them. Can't remember exactly who. And there was a lot of distrust. So now the focus coming up is on not only the relationship between leaders and followers and the importance of followers, but the ethical values and standards that people in leadership and as followership would pay attention to. So all these reciprocal leadership theories that they talk about focus its attention on shifting into these theories. And he spoke about these in that video, the transformational leadership versus the transactional leadership, the servant leadership that he spoke about, and one he didn't talk about, which is the followership. But again, it's the same thing. Focus on the followers and their importance and the fact that the followers are going to be the future of the organization, and therefore the purpose of the leader was to make sure that the followership is able to develop and move forward in terms of that in that. So there's a lot of elements here that I think he described fairly well. These are some of the leaders that I've found or were identified as transformational leaders. So for those of you who can identify everybody, what did they lead a transformation in? So we know Mahatma Gandhi led with the transformation of India in terms of its independence. Of course, there was a dark side to that because of the separation of India and Pakistan and the loss of life that took place as a result of that. Um, and interesting, all of these individuals, with the exception of these two here, were assassinated for the work that they did, huh? In terms of transformational thing, because they went against the status quo of things. Of course, we know Abraham Lincoln and his story with the abolition of slavery and the separate the Civil War that resulted as that. We had Martin Luther King, who was assassinated because of the work that he did in transforming the American society, in particular the life of Black Americans. JFK was assassinated to a great extent. He led to that emergence of a period of hope in the early 50s into 60s in the US politicians. In fact, when he was assassinated, a lot of people um, felt that hope in America died. So because they looked upon him as this blue-eyed child who would lead them through the promised land kind of thing. Highly charismatic individual. Again, another individual with high levels of charisma. This gentleman here, President Roosevelt, he led the United States successfully out of the 1920s, 1930s depression into the 19 into the World War II, and successfully navigated that and brought the well, almost, because he died in his last term, um, and I think it was another president picked up, Eisenhower, I think it was, who took up after him in the wartime to end the war with World War II. But he successfully drew the nation through those harrowing people. So again, transformation. And of course, Mother Teresa here is the epitome of transformation in terms of us giving away or giving up a materialistic life to focus our attention on the upliftment of all those people around us who are suffering, those who are sick, infirmed, and disabled, and differently abled, and so on. That is the nature of what their leadership comes with, right? So we have a lot of people contributing to the development of all those relational theories. Now, he talked about servant theory, so now we're not going to go there. We talked about followership already. We did some diagrams in relation to fellowship, so that was good. Um, so we talked about followership before. All right, now one of the things that he didn't talk about was this next theory that kind of involved. It had to do with the shifting of the paradigm of leadership. So if we think about leadership that was developed in the early part of the 19th century into the 20th century, what we found is that the theories were very well, the phrases here, I took this out of the text. They were structurally functionalist, management oriented, personalistic, and focused only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self interested, and individualistic in outlook, male oriented, utilitarian, and materialistic in ethical perspective, and rationalistic, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific in language and methodology. So, this in essence describes the way in which theoretical development throughout the early 20th century and coming to the end of the 20th century governed how the theory was going to be developed. And that paradigm sits upon the paradigm of industry and the way in which the world worked. The problem with that is that world does not exist Shifting away from that industrial paradigm is important because it took a while for the theory to start to make transitions, but it's also taken a while for our societies to also shift our focus away from the industrialization paradigm. There's one that's even slower to move, which is the educational systems designed to provide workers for the workforce has been even slower to make that change. And in fact, especially in countries like Trinidad and other third world countries or other developing countries, let me not use that derogatory term, other developing countries, you find that education is designed to provide for a leadership model and a, a production model that sits upon the concept of industrialization. And that is no longer the case. And that is the shift that needs to happen in the education system to help us make that transition, which is one of the reasons why when we offered a degree in entrepreneurship, a lot of people, were resistant at why am I doing entrepreneurship? I don't want to open a business. But the concept of entrepreneurial thinking is beyond opening a business. It's thinking in an entrepreneurial manner. And that is part of the mindset that we keep on talking about. That shift away from industrialization. All right. So in doing this, what we have to focus on is the reality that we face, and we could look at the last major upsurgence that took place in terms of the pandemic. That it really speaks to an environment that is full of change, sudden, and in our case here, it happened so quickly that we had to make massive amount of changes in a short space of time, and therefore the theories that existed in the past, and probably some of them that exist now, still do not adequately provide for the circumstances under which we are operating. Now, think about think about what we were taught in school. We were taught, or we are always given the concept that the world is a neat, easy place to work in. It's a controllable work. We need to be organized, we need to do things a particular manner. But the reality is that the world is a lot messier, and we have to be able to work in that mess and be productive in that mess. Now, anybody here has OCD? Because this is where it comes up. I always have really sneaky feeling that, and I mean, darling, I feel very, what's the word I feel? A sort of disjointedness emotionally when I look at the world around me and I think about when I die, there's so many things that will remain undone, and I feel a sense of incompletion, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I sometimes worry about it, but I have to try and push that aside because I am thinking, much like what I was prepared for in my school time, that the world is this nice, neat place and we need to keep order and keep things in control. The reality that faces us is that the world is a chaotic place. There's no way for us to enforce any sort of control around it, and that we have to be really paying attention to how we navigate our way through it. Now, I have some OCD tendencies. I like things done in a particular way. I like things done in at a particular time. It's annoying, and unfortunately, I'm not very far on the spectrum. But if it's annoying for me at a lower level of OCD, what might it be for somebody who really suffers from OCD? And we come from an environment where we want predictable outcomes for our lives, but the lives that we live are absolute chaos. Now, how many of y'all may feel a similar sense of foreboding like I might be feeling? I don't know if I've been able to explain it. Anybody shares in my dilemma? No? Durham, go ahead. Open your mic, share. You can't just put up your hand. You have to say something. Akila? All right. Well, I am happy that that Miss Durham shares in my thinking, but it'd be nice to hear her version of it. Anybody else has a
Can you hear me?
hi, Akila,
I'm
hearing you
sorry,
now.
can you hear me?
I'm hearing you now.
Right, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. I do share similar feelings with that. I do like things a particular way, and it just feeds into a lot of anxiety that I have. So that's how
Correct.
it
Yeah.
affects me on
Yeah.
like a personal scale. I
Yep.
just feel a lot of anxiety on every day. It's really it's
Yeah.
just like that.
That makes so much sense. That's exactly what it is. Anxiety. Camille, what is it that you wanted to add?
Well, not so much in terms of my worldview like you. I don't worry about it on that level. But OCD, I think I have OCD tendencies in that I like things done in a particular way in a particular time, and when it doesn't happen, it tends to feel overwhelming.
Right. Anxiety.
So yeah. So in that way, yeah.
And you see, and we are saying, okay, we want us to practice leadership in this manner. We want to practice leadership in the context where we assume that the world is this nice, neat, controllable environment. The reality is that's not. We are surrounded by absolute chaos. And the theory that comes up here is called chaos theory. Um, and in the chaos, we have to actually pay attention to three things in particular. One, to be able to navigate this, is the first thing we have to do is we have to be able to look at and take note of what the theory. Well, the understanding is this: that what may look chaotic, there's actually some hidden patterns that we have to pay attention to. And in order to pay attention to that pattern or to find that pattern, we have to pay attention to what the text refers to of the what's the thing that we want to pay attention to? Right, the initial conditions. So for us to be dealing with chaotic situations, the first thing we need to do is to pay attention to what started this change or what has started this problem or this chaos. We have to first and foremost pay attention to that because it's likely that where it started will help us to determine where it's actually going to end. The second thing we need to do is we need to stop thinking of or and start to think of and. So much so that they refer to it as andness and anding. So that we need to be able to practice a lot of andness and anding, meaning that we need to be looking to work with other people or to combine different things to be able to achieve solutions or to find solutions. The other element now is that not only do we need to and, but we also need to stop thinking about either or and think about both and. So we need to stop thinking of isolating or excluding things, but to think about including things even if they may appear to be wrong. There's some aspect of it that may be right. So at the end of the day, what you're going to find is that the answer to a problem that we may be facing is not going to be solved by using one approach, but by combining a number of partial approaches or partial solutions to be able to eventually come to some sort of overall solution made up of right and wrong working together. So not and that in itself sounds like a mess because that's sort of like it sounds almost like patchwork basically, but in essence the world is in a chaotic environment and we need to find ways to find a patch. Basically in programming it's referred to as you know getting a patch to solve a problem, which is to sort of fix an issue that at least in the short run we get some sort of solution. So chaos theory, it is chaos situations and chaos systems is a problem for leadership to be able to operate in because we have to be able to find solutions as a leader. We have to lead our people through those circumstances and those situations. And how you go about doing it is not by leaving anybody out. So you have to pay attention to what took place at the beginning. You have to pay attention to how you are treating individuals and their contributions towards the thing, and you have to and those things, and you have to recognize the strength of the team as opposed to the strength of any one individual or yourself. And we have to be willing to look past what might appear to be incorrect for what aspect of what is presented to you as incorrect as having some form of correctness to it, and having those incomplete or combination of incomplete ideas to eventually find an overall solution for your existing problem at this point in time. Interesting um, way to approach things with partial solutions and so on. Quite a handful. Now, so he talked about this theory, and it sounds very vague, and that's one of the criticisms of it. Chaos theory is a vague theory, and it means that we have to be almost like shapeshifters all the way through, be able to move and change and move along from it. Okay, so coming near the end here, guys. Um, so he spoke about authentic leadership, and for me, one of the critical things about authentic leadership is the almost surreal nature of the individuals who have to participate in this to be authentic leaders. So everybody in authentic leadership has to be authentic. And what does it mean to be authentic? So this guy, and he spoke about Avolo and Lutherans, they describe the authentic leadership as being the confluence of positive psychology, transformational leadership, and moral, ethical leadership. The authentic leader has to be somebody who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. One of the things that was left off of this description and is relevant in today's environment is they also have to be genderless, because we need to minimize the impact of separation or division that can take place as a result of gender identification and lifestyle choices. So you have a host of characteristics here that speak to whether or not somebody can actually be this. This is my concern, and this is what I think is the concern of authentic leadership models. We are asking people to be in a situation which is highly idealistic. And not only are the leaders going to be that way, but the people with whom they are working with also need to interact in that particular manner. Highly high values or great ethical values, being very transparent with everybody else around you, nothing on the down low, everything up at face value and so on. I mean, where are we going to get this type of thing, you know? A root construct. So let's look at this description here. Avello describes authentic leadership as a root construct at the very base or core of what constitutes profound positive leadership in whatever form it exists. It recognizes the need to understand the powerful impact of hope, trust, and positive emotions, and the need to understand the attitudes and behaviors of the followers. Now, it means that we are appealing to everybody's higher thinking skills, and we want everybody to be in this um, almost utopian type of situation. Now, I understand the need for theory to describe the ideal, and that the reality has to play catch up. All right? And I think this is a really beautiful theory, but I don't think that in given the world around me and the chaos that we face, it is just a tad too, for me, a little too clean, you know. I don't think it takes into consideration the morass of failure that exists around us, the fact that a lot of people who might have these authentic characteristics, both from follower and leader, just are simply unwilling to participate in leadership positions because their high values, their moral standings in life will will be, you know, jeopardized by the nature of um, the leadership that they. I remember one politician many years ago in the 80s and 90s who went into to government, and I think by the end of the year he left government because he felt as if he just couldn't get anything done. Um, oh, what was his name again? It was one of the Pantons. He was the Minister of Education at that time. I don't know if any of you all would ever recall him, but he left the ministry after serving a year with the government of the day. I think that was with the NAR. Um, and he left simply because and he left to set up something called the Field Foundation. Anybody here is familiar with the Field Foundation? FWEL. Sophia,
Yes.
you're familiar with Field and what
Yeah.
they do, right? And that was why he set up the Field Foundation. He felt that in working in government, he was unable to be his true self. He had to bend to all of the cultural situations that the public sector brought it. He had to deal with during his time. That's when tutor became the representative for teachers, and unionization took place. A whole sort of things took place, and he felt as if, you know, he was unable to contribute to the development of Trinidad and Tobago through working in the Ministry of Ed. And I mean, and a lot of other ministers and a lot of political people tried to make him stay the course. But I think it worked for him because he was probably experiencing something called cognitive dissonance in a massive way, to the point that he just simply couldn't see himself operating in that circumstance anymore. And I can appreciate that as well, because I've gone through that in my life a few times, and I've stepped back from certain types of activities because of that, and certain jobs I've left, like the job I was talking about earlier with Camille, working in URP. I think for me it was good for me to have left or lost that job, because I don't think I could have survived in in um, in reality. I couldn't survive without some degree of scarring in an organization that is steeped in ineptitude and corruption. I don't think I can operate in that type of environment. I was also in when I left the Ministry of Education eventually. I think I dodged a bullet, because if I had stayed with the Ministry of Education, I would have been reallocated into a secondary school somewhere, because I was teaching in John Donaldson Technical at the time, and we were teaching at that associate degree level, which at that time we called the technicians diplomas. And I was the examiner for the subject, and I you know, I had a say in terms of the curriculum, the method of examination, and all that type of stuff. And having to step back into teaching in a secondary school, I think I might have been overwhelmed or underwhelmed by the kind of mediocrity that I see coming up through it, the pure bureaucracy of the situation. When I came to Costa and we started developing our own programs, developing our own standards of teaching, employing um, uh, this thing, learner-centered approaches to the teaching methodology in the classroom spaces. I remember when I tried learner-centered teaching when I was working on the Ministry of Education at John Donaldson. I remember not only were students giving me trouble, but the head of department gave me trouble. The my fellow teachers gave me lots of headaches with all of the techniques that I was trying to, you know, reach the class and change the setup and change the system, employ some different techniques. I dodged that bullet when I left. I left the Ministry of Education and joined COSTAT. Um, and you know, I've never looked back since. I mean, for me, I was trying to be authentic to me and what I would like to do. And I was fortunate that I didn't stay in those environments because I couldn't be the person I am today if I had stayed in those types of environments because I would have been crushed. I would have been absolutely crushed by the organization because, as they said, culture culture defeats strategic development all the time. I think it's one of the reasons why my father got so frustrated that he retired early from the ministry of education for the same kind of things. He just didn't have an option at that time to go into something that looked better. Interesting. So again, the reason why we have authentic leadership is because authentic leadership is an ideal towards which we can work towards, which is a good thing. Because if we don't have something to measure reality against, then we kind of just, throwing throwing stones in the dark kind of situation and hoping to hit something. Hmm, that's important. So the although authentic leadership may appear to be this idealistic version of what um, leadership ought to be, it's giving us a good um, image of what we should be aiming for. All right. Anybody has any questions about this in terms of the authentic leadership? Because after this, it's just a summary.
No, sir.
It looks good. All right, everybody. So what I will do for your own information is put that link into the WhatsApp chat for you guys, so that you could get into there's a whole series of other videos he has done in relation to that. And of course it's here as well, so you could always get it here. But I'll put the link in the I'll copy the link to the what. In fact, let me do that now by Wednesday. Let me put that here. Paste. All right. So for those of you who would like to go view this link on your own, organize and see what you can get done. Um, Now, what I wanted to warn you about is that we have done a lot in this chapter here. We did a lot of theory. Um, I don't require you to memorize any of this information. What I'd like you to do is to go through the information and think about it, reflect on it, and you start to work out, as was asked in the video, which of these theories appeals to you. If one of the theories appeals to you more, go to the section in the chapter that describes the theory in more detail and go through it in more detail and see what appeals to you. There are no exams. What we are doing here is more important than exams. This is determining where your leadership style is likely to move in the future. This is about your personal development, not about a score on a transcript. That's what I want you also to take from this. This is a class not for just to pass. This is a class that you are required to do to help you develop yourself. And that's the most important element that I can say. Mr. Clive Panton, yes, served as a senator and minister in his government. Yes, Third Republic of Trinidad. Who is finding this? Sophia. All right, cool. Thanks for the info. 1986 to 1991. That is quite correct, yes. Thank you for sharing. All right. We're coming near the close of today and in record time too. Anybody has any questions, concerns, or comments they would like to make in relation to what we went through today in chapter 2? Feel free to share. All right. If nobody...
So far, so good.
Yes, Camille?
I said so far, so good.
Okay. Now, lots of you to reflect about here. Next week, we will be dealing with chapter 3. That's me. I will be dealing with that. And in chapter 3, we'll be outlining the model that we are looking at from the main text, which is the relational leadership model. So we're going to pay a lot of attention to that. All right. Now, next week, I want to get some reports back from all the groups before we start class on your progress with preparation. I would like at least for you all to have at least, individually speaking, at least read the chapter that you are responsible for teaching to the class. So I'd like to get some feedback on that. Okay, guys? All right. So thank you once again for joining us, for joining me, and for participating. For those of you who have been able to participate, I know some of you all might want to say things, but you might be a little intimidated to turn on your microphone. Feel free to, message in the chat about things, or to message in the classroom if you want to add your voice to the thing. But what I hope would happen is that a lot of what we're doing in class will find its way into your personal reflections, and I will see it in your self-analysis, in your reflections and leadership plans, that are documents that you'll be producing closer to the end of the class. All right, of the course itself, I should say. All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and I think I won't see you all for the before the holiday, so enjoy your Republic Day next week. All right.
Bye, sir. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Good afternoon, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.